The night Vanessa Hale left Ethan Cole stranded during the worst snowstorm in a decade, she didn't think twice about it. Power meant never apologizing, never doubting, never looking back. But when her car spun out on black ice hours later, leaving her freezing and abandoned on an empty highway, the only headlights that appeared through the blinding snow belonged to the man whose daughter she'd refused to let him save. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this journey travels. Vanessa Hale's office sat on the 42nd floor of Crestline Tower, and from that height, the people below looked like insects. She preferred it that way. At 30 years old, she was the youngest CEO in Crestline Holdings' 70-year history, a fact that Wall Street loved to mention and her employees loved to resent. The corner office was steel and glass. Minimalist furniture, no photographs, no personal items. Nothing that suggested vulnerability. Nothing that suggested she was human. Tuesday morning started like every other. Vanessa arrived at 6:15, espresso in hand, scanning the overnight reports before most of the building even had power turned on. By 7, she'd already sent 14 emails, each one surgical in its criticism. By 8, 3 department heads were sweating in conference rooms, scrambling to explain why their quarterly projections looked soft. She didn't enjoy making people uncomfortable. She just didn't care whether she did. "Ms. Hale, the operations review is ready," her assistant said through the intercom. Vanessa stood without responding, smoothing her suit jacket. Charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, expensive enough that people noticed, but not flashy enough to seem desperate. Everything about her appearance was calculated. The severe dark hair pulled back tight. The minimal jewelry. The heels that added 3 inches she didn't need but wore anyway because height was power and power was everything. The conference room fell silent when she entered. 12 people sat around the table, mostly men over 50 who still hadn't forgiven the board for choosing her. Vanessa didn't sit. She never sat at these meetings. Standing meant control. "Logistics is running 7% over budget," she said, looking directly at Gerald Moss, the operations VP who'd been with the company since before she was born. "That's 3 quarters in a row. It is shamko." Gerald shifted in his seat. "We've had supply chain complications." "Everyone has supply chain complications," Vanessa interrupted. "Crestline doesn't pay you to have the same problems as everyone else. With respect, Ms. Hale, the solutions aren't always immediate. Then find people who can make them immediate." The threat hung in the air. Gerald's face went red, but he nodded. 2 seats down, Marcus Chen from finance looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Vanessa spent the next 40 minutes dismantling every excuse, every projection, every carefully prepared explanation. By the time she finished, half the room looked nauseous. "That's all, she said, gathering her tablet. "Fix it." She was halfway to the door when Gerald spoke up, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You know, Ms. Hale, there are human beings behind these numbers." Vanessa stopped, turned, met his eyes with the kind of cold stare that had made junior analysts quit on the spot. "Then they should work harder," she said, "so I don't have to replace them." She left before anyone could respond. Back in her office, Vanessa pulled up the logistics department files. 7% over budget meant someone wasn't doing their job. She scrolled through personnel records, performance reviews, salary data. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't make excuses. Numbers were clean. She was 3 spreadsheets deep when her assistant knocked. "Ms. Hale, the Weather Service just issued a blizzard warning. They're saying it could be the worst storm in 15 years. Vanessa didn't look up. "And? Some departments are asking about early dismissal." "No. But the roads? The roads will be fine for another few hours. We have a product launch on Thursday. If people leave now, we'll miss the deadline." Vanessa finally glanced up, her expression making it clear the conversation was over. "Send a company-wide email. All essential personnel stay until the work is finished." Her assistant hesitated. "All essential personnel?" "Everyone who wants to keep their job." The email went out at 2:30. By 3 o'clock, snow was already falling heavy and wet against the tower windows. By 4, the sky had turned the color of old bruises, and the wind was howling loud enough to hear through the reinforced glass. Vanessa stood at the window, watching the streets below disappear under white. Traffic had slowed to a crawl. Smart people were already home. But smart people didn't build empires. Her phone buzzed. Another weather alert. She dismissed it without reading. At 6 o'clock, her assistant appeared in the doorway, coat already on, worry written across her face. Ms. Hale, the city just declared a state of emergency. They're closing highways. Then people should have worked faster. Most of the staff has already left. I said essential personnel stays. There's maybe 20 people left in the building. Vanessa turned from the window, irritation flashing across her features. Then those are the 20 people who understand what commitment means. Her assistant opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then thought better of it and left. Vanessa returned to her computer. The product launch wasn't going to finish itself. 7 floors down, in a cramped corner of the logistics department, Ethan Cole was trying not to panic. He'd been staring at the same spreadsheet for 20 minutes, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. Sophie's daycare closed at 6:30. It was 6:15 now. The snow outside was coming down so hard he could barely see the building across the street, and traffic on the bridge was completely stopped. His phone buzzed. A text from the daycare director. Mr. Cole, we're losing power. Generator should hold for a few hours, but the storm is getting worse. How soon can you get here? Ethan's stomach dropped. He looked at his computer screen, at the unfinished reports that Vanessa Hale's office had demanded before end of day, then at the window where snow was piling up on the ledge faster than seemed possible. Hey, Ethan. Marcus Chen appeared at his cubicle, already wearing his coat. You still here? Can't leave. Hale wants these projections finished. Marcus made a face. Man, everyone else already bailed. Storm's supposed to get worse before it gets better. I know. You okay? You look stressed. Ethan rubbed his face. Sophie's daycare is about to lose power. They're holding on with a generator, but if this storm keeps up... Marcus glanced toward the elevator, then back at Ethan. His voice dropped. Look, I'm not saying you should ignore a direct order from the CEO, but she's not your kid's parent. You are. If I leave, I'm fired. If you don't leave, what happens to Sophie? The question sat between them like a weight. Ethan knew the answer. He'd known it the moment the weather alerts started coming in. But knowing something and acting on it were different things entirely. Marcus squeezed his shoulder. Good luck, man. Whatever you decide. Then he was gone. Then, and Ethan was alone with the numbers on his screen and the growing panic in his chest. He lasted another 10 minutes before he couldn't take it anymore. Ethan saved his work, grabbed his coat, and headed for the elevator. His heart was hammering. In 5 years at Crestline, he'd never directly disobeyed an order. He showed up on time, stayed late when asked, kept his head down, and did the work. That was how you survived in a place like this. That was how you kept the paycheck coming when you had a 6-year-old daughter depending on you. But none of that mattered if Sophie was sitting in a dark daycare, scared and alone, wondering why her dad hadn't come. The elevator took forever. When the doors finally opened on the 42nd floor, Ethan's hands were shaking. Vanessa's assistant wasn't at her desk. The executive wing was dark, except for one office at the end of the hall, light spilling from an open door. Ethan made himself walk forward. Each step felt heavier than the last. Vanessa was at her desk, focused on her laptop, fingers moving across the keyboard with the kind of speed that suggested she'd forgotten other people existed. She didn't look up when Ethan knocked on the doorframe. Ms. Hale? Still typing. If you're here to ask about leaving early, the answer is no. My daughter. I don't care. Vanessa's voice was flat, completely devoid of interest. Whatever personal situation you're about to describe is not my problem. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. She's 6 years old. Her daycare is losing power. Now Vanessa looked up, and her eyes were the coldest thing Ethan had ever seen, colder than the storm outside, colder than the snow piling up against the windows. Then you should have planned better, she said. This launch is critical. If it's late, we lose the contract. If we lose the contract, people lose their jobs. Your daughter's daycare situation doesn't change that math. They have a generator, but it's only good for a few hours. Not my problem. Each word came out like a door slamming shut. You leave now, you're fired. It's that simple. Ethan stared at her, trying to find something human in that face, some hint of empathy or understanding or basic decency. There was nothing. "Please," he said quietly. "She's just a kid." Vanessa returned her attention to the laptop. "Then you'd better get back to work so you can afford to keep taking care of her." The dismissal was absolute. Ethan stood there for another few seconds, waiting for her to change her mind, to realize what she was asking, to acknowledge that this was insane. She didn't look up again. Ethan turned and walked back to the elevator, his whole body numb. The doors closed. The numbers counted down. And somewhere deep in his chest, something hardened. He rode the elevator back to his floor, grabbed his things, and left anyway. If Vanessa Hale wanted to fire him for choosing his daughter, then he'd find another job. There were worse things than unemployment. There were worse things than starting over. Leaving your kid alone in a blackout during a blizzard was one of them. The parking garage was nearly empty. Snow had already drifted against the entrance, and Ethan's old pickup truck was covered in several inches of white. He spent 5 minutes clearing the windshield with his bare hands because he'd forgotten his scraper at home. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the daycare. "Power's out. We're okay on the generator, but roads are getting bad. Please hurry." Ethan climbed into the truck, hands shaking so hard he could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a rough cough, and he pulled out into the storm. The streets were a nightmare. What should have been a 20-minute drive turned into 45 minutes of crawling through whiteout conditions, watching cars slide and fishtail, listening to the radio announce road closures and accident reports. The whole time, Ethan's phone kept buzzing with increasingly worried texts. By the time he reached the daycare, it was almost 8 o'clock. Sophie was the last kid there. She was sitting in the dark with Mrs. Chen, the director, huddled under a blanket near the generator that was making an ominous rattling sound. When she saw Ethan, her face crumpled. "Daddy!" She ran into his arms so hard she almost knocked him over. Ethan held her tight, feeling her shake, and guilt crashed over him so intensely he could barely breathe. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "So sorry I'm late. I thought you weren't coming." Sophie's voice was muffled against his coat. "I thought you got stuck in the snow." "I'll always come," Ethan said. "Always. I promise." Mrs. Chen stood up, relief written all over her face. "Thank God. We were about to call emergency services. The roads are completely impassable now." Ethan looked toward the windows where snow was piling up against the glass like something alive. "How bad is it?" "They're saying worst storm in 15 years. Most of the city's lost power." She hesitated. "Are you going to be able to get home?" "We'll be fine," Ethan lied. They weren't fine. It took Ethan 3 tries to get the truck out of the daycare parking lot, the wheels spinning uselessly in snow that was now past his ankles. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in her blanket, quiet in the way that meant she was scared but trying not to show it. "It's okay, baby," Ethan said, more to himself than to her. "We're okay." They made it 2 miles before traffic stopped completely. Ethan sat there with the engine running, watching the line of red taillights disappear into the white ahead of them. The radio was reporting accidents on every major road. The highway was closed. Side streets were impassable. His phone buzzed. Low battery warning. He'd forgotten to charge it that morning. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice was small. "Are we stuck?" "No, honey. Just waiting." But 20 minutes later, they still hadn't moved. The car ahead of them had its hazards on. Behind them, someone was laying on their horn like that would somehow clear the road. Ethan was trying to figure out their options when he saw something in the rearview mirror. A car had spun out about 100 yards back, sliding sideways across the road before slamming into a snowbank. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened and someone got out. Even through the snow, Ethan recognized that silhouette. Vanessa Hale stood beside her wrecked car, phone pressed to her ear, looking around like she was expecting someone to materialize and fix the situation immediately. Ethan watched her for a long moment, watched her try the phone again, watched her look up and down the empty road, watched her pull her coat tighter as the wind picked up. Then he put the truck in park and climbed out. "Stay here," he told Sophie. The snow was coming down so hard Ethan could barely see 10 feet in front of him. The wind cut through his coat like it wasn't there. By the time he reached Vanessa's car, his face was numb. She didn't see him until he was right beside her. "Ms. Hale." Vanessa spun around, and for just a second, Ethan saw something he'd never seen before on her face. Fear. Real, genuine fear. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar cold mask. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Your car's wrecked." "I can see that." She looked down at her phone, shook it like that would somehow bring back the signal. "My driver was supposed to be here 2 hours ago. He's not answering." "Oh, roads are closed," Ethan said. "Nobody's getting through." Vanessa stared at him like he'd just told her gravity stopped working. "That's impossible." "Yeah, well..." Ethan gestured at the line of stopped traffic, at the snow that was now blowing sideways in sheets of white. "Here we are, She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at her phone again. Her hands were shaking, and Ethan couldn't tell if it was from cold or anger or fear or some combination of all three. "I need to get back to the city," she said finally. "City's shut down. Nobody's getting anywhere tonight." "That's unacceptable." Ethan almost laughed. Almost. "You want to argue with the storm about it?" Vanessa's jaw tightened, and for a moment Ethan thought she was going to snap at him. Fire him right there on the side of the highway in the middle of a blizzard. But then something in her expression shifted. Something that looked almost like helplessness. "I can't be stuck here," she said, and her voice was quieter than he'd ever heard it. Ethan looked at her. This woman who'd refused to let him leave, who'd threatened his job, who'd looked at him like he was nothing. He should leave her there. He should walk away and let her figure it out on her own. That's what she would have done. Instead, he heard himself say, "My truck's up the road. I can give you a ride." Vanessa stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's a blizzard," Ethan said, "and you'll freeze if you stay out here." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she nodded. They made it back to the truck, just as Sophie was starting to look worried. When Vanessa climbed into the back seat, Sophie's eyes went wide. "Who's that?" "Someone who needs help," Ethan said, starting the engine. He could feel Vanessa's eyes on the back of his head, could practically hear her thoughts. This was the truck of someone who worked in logistics. This was the life of someone she'd threatened to fire 3 hours ago. "Where are we going?" Vanessa asked. Ethan pulled carefully back onto the road, though calling it a road at this point was generous. "Nowhere fast, but there's a side route that might still be open. If we can make it there before it gets worse." "If?" "Lady, there's no guarantees tonight. What?" They drove in tense silence, the truck crawling through snow that was getting deeper by the minute. Ethan had both hands gripped tight on the wheel, every muscle tense, trying to feel the road through the tires. Beside him, Sophie was quiet, watching the storm with wide eyes. In the back seat, Vanessa was absolutely still. They made it another mile before they hit the next problem. The bridge. It stretched ahead of them, a narrow 2-lane span that crossed a frozen creek. Normally, it would have taken 30 seconds to drive across. Tonight, it looked like a death trap. The surface was completely covered in ice, wind screaming across the open space hard enough to rock the truck. Ethan stopped at the entrance, engine idling. "What's wrong?" Vanessa asked. "That bridge is a sheet of ice. If we slide..." He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Below the bridge was a 20-foot drop to frozen water and rocks. "Can we go around?" "Not without adding 2 hours. And I don't think we have 2 hours." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then, "So what do you suggest?" Ethan took a breath. "We go slow, real slow, and we pray." "I thought you said no guarantees." "I lied." Sophie reached over and grabbed his hand. Her fingers were small and cold. "It's okay, Daddy. You're a good driver." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Hang on, baby." He eased the truck forward. The moment they hit the bridge, everything changed. The tires lost traction immediately, and the truck started to drift. Ethan turned into the slide, gentle, no sudden movements, feeling for the edge of control. Wind slammed into the side hard enough to push them toward the guardrail. In the back seat, he heard Vanessa's breath catch. They were halfway across when the truck started spinning. It happened slowly, almost gently. One moment they were pointed forward, the next, the whole world was rotating. Ethan didn't brake, didn't accelerate, just held the wheel steady and waited for physics to decide their fate. Sophie made a small sound. The truck completed a full 180, facing backward, and stopped. For several seconds, nobody breathed. Then Ethan put the truck in reverse and backed carefully the rest of the way across the bridge. When they finally made it to solid ground on the other side, he had to sit for a minute with his hand shaking on the wheel. "You okay?" he asked Sophie. She nodded, eyes huge. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. Vanessa was pressed back in her seat, face pale, one hand gripping the door handle hard enough that her knuckles were white. "Still want to argue with the storm?" he asked. She didn't answer. They drove for another hour, crawling through neighborhoods that were dark and empty, past abandoned cars and houses with no lights. Sophie fell asleep against Ethan's shoulder. Vanessa stayed silent in the back. Finally, Ethan turned down a quiet street lined with small houses and pulled into a narrow driveway. "Where are we?" Vanessa asked. "My place." He could feel her tension from the front seat. "I need to get back to the city." "Lady, nobody's getting anywhere tonight. Roads are closed. Power's out. You saw that bridge." Ethan turned off the engine and looked back at her. "You can stay here where it's warm, or you can freeze in your wrecked car. Your choice." Vanessa stared at the house. It was small, maybe 1,200 square feet, vinyl siding, a chain-link fence, Christmas lights that weren't lit because the power was out. "How long?" she asked. "Storm's supposed to clear by morning. Roads should be passable by afternoon." "Should be?" "I'm not a weatherman, Ms. Hale. I'm just trying to keep us alive." For a moment, he thought she was going to refuse. Thought she was going to demand he take her back. Consequences be damned. Then she opened the door and climbed out into the snow. Inside, the house was cold but not freezing. Ethan had a gas fireplace that still worked, and he got it lit while Sophie stumbled sleepily toward her room. Vanessa stood in the entryway, looking around like she'd just walked onto another planet. The house was cluttered in the way that houses with kids always are. Shoes by the door, backpack on the floor, drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, a pile of laundry on the couch that Ethan hadn't gotten around to folding. Vanessa's expression was unreadable. "You can have the couch," Ethan said, grabbing the laundry and dumping it in a basket. "There's blankets in the closet, bathrooms down the hall." "Thank you," Vanessa said quietly. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. In the firelight, she looked different, smaller somehow. Human. "You would have fired me," he said, "for leaving tonight." Vanessa met his eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Yes," she said finally, "I would have." "Sophie was alone in the dark, and you didn't care." "No," Vanessa said, "I didn't." The honesty was almost worse than a lie would have been. Ethan turned away. "Get some sleep, Ms. Hale. It's going to be a long night." He left her standing there and went to check on Sophie, who was already asleep in her bed, teddy bear clutched tight. Ethan pulled the blanket up to her chin and kissed her forehead. When he came back out, Vanessa was still standing in the same spot, staring at the drawings on the refrigerator. One of them showed a stick figure man and a smaller stick figure holding hands under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in Sophie's careful handwriting, "My dad is the best." Vanessa reached out like she was going to touch it, then stopped. "I don't have children," she said to the empty room. Ethan didn't respond, just handed her a blanket and went to his own room, closing the door behind him. Outside, the storm howled on. Ethan woke up at 5:30 to the sound of silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that meant the power was still out. The heat wasn't running, and the house had dropped to somewhere around 50 degrees. He could see his breath in the dim morning light filtering through the curtains. He lay there for a minute, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember if last night had actually happened or if he'd dreamed the whole thing. The storm. The bridge. Vanessa Hale sleeping on his couch. Then he heard movement in the living room, and reality came crashing back. Ethan pulled on a sweatshirt and opened his bedroom door. The house was cold enough that his joints ached. He could hear Sophie still sleeping in her room, her breathing soft and even through the thin walls. In the living room, Vanessa was standing at the window, still wearing yesterday's suit, arms wrapped around herself. She'd folded the blanket neatly on the couch. Her hair had come loose from its severe style, falling around her shoulders in a way that made her look younger, more human. She turned when she heard him, and for a second, neither of them knew what to say. "Morning," Ethan said finally. "The power's out." "Yeah, probably won't come back until they clear the lines." Vanessa looked out the window again. The street was buried under at least 2 feet of snow, maybe more in the drifts. No cars moving, no people, just white as far as they could see. My phone's dead, she said. Mine too, and the cell towers are probably down anyway. I need to contact my office. They'll survive without you for a few hours. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Maybe because she knew he was right. Maybe because arguing took energy she didn't have. Ethan moved past her to check the fireplace. Still had some heat, but it wouldn't last long. He added another log, watched the flames catch. You hungry? He asked. I don't eat breakfast. You do today. It's going to be a long morning. He went to the kitchen and started pulling things out of the refrigerator. Without power, everything would spoil anyway. Eggs, bread, some leftover bacon. The gas stove still worked, at least. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, watching him crack eggs into a bowl like she'd never seen someone cook before. Can I help? Ethan glanced at her. You know how to cook? I know how to order takeout. That's what I figured. He handed her a fork. Beat those eggs. Not too hard, just until the yolks break. She took the fork carefully, like it might explode, and started stirring. Too fast at first, then slower when Ethan showed her. It should have been awkward. This woman who'd threatened his job 12 hours ago, now standing in his kitchen beating eggs with the uncertain movements of someone who'd never done it before. Instead, it was just strange. Why did you come back for me? Vanessa asked suddenly. Ethan didn't look at her, focusing on the bacon sizzling in the pan. Would you have left someone to freeze? Yes. The honesty stopped him. He turned to look at her. She wasn't smiling, wasn't trying to soften it, just stating a fact. Then I guess we're different, he said. I would have fired you. You still might. I probably should. Ethan flipped the bacon, grease popping. So why haven't you? Vanessa didn't answer, just kept stirring the eggs, slower now, more careful. Like if she focused hard enough on the task, she wouldn't have to think about the question. They ate in the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch because the kitchen table was covered in Sophie's art supplies. Vanessa picked at her food at first, then ate with the kind of hunger that suggested she'd skipped dinner last night. Probably skipped lunch, too. When did you eat last? Ethan asked. She had to think about it. Yesterday morning, coffee and a protein bar. That's it? I was busy. You're always busy. Vanessa looked at him sharply, but Ethan just shrugged. Everyone at Crestline knows, Ms. Hale. You're the first one in, last one out. You don't take lunch. You don't take breaks. You work like someone's chasing you. Someone is always chasing you in business. Or maybe you're just running. The words hung there. Vanessa set down her fork, and for a moment, Ethan thought she was going to tell him to mind his own business, to remember who he was talking to remember that she could still destroy his career with one phone call. Instead, she said, My father built Crestline from nothing. Died of a heart attack at his desk when I was 22. The board wanted to sell. I stopped them. Ethan waited. Everyone said I was too young, too inexperienced, too emotional. Vanessa's voice was flat, but there was something underneath it, something sharp. So I became the opposite. No emotions, no weakness, just results. Sounds lonely. Lonely doesn't matter when you're winning. You sure about that? Before Vanessa could answer, Sophie's door opened, and she shuffled out in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Daddy? Hey, baby. How'd you sleep? Awesome. Cold. Sophie noticed Vanessa on the couch and stopped, suddenly shy. Is the snow lady still here? Ethan bit back a smile. The snow lady? She came in from the snow last night. Sophie looked at Vanessa with the kind of direct, unfiltered curiosity only kids have. Are you staying? Vanessa looked completely lost, like someone had just asked her to solve an equation in a language she didn't speak. Just until the road's clear, Ethan said, saving her. Come on, let's get you some breakfast. While Sophie ate, Ethan tried the radio. Most stations were static, but he finally found one coming through weak and crackling. The news wasn't good. The storm had dumped 3 feet of snow on the region. Interstate was closed. City had declared a state of emergency. Power companies were saying it could be days before everything was restored. Days? Vanessa said. Welcome to winter. I can't stay here for days. You got somewhere else to go? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. The morning stretched out strange and slow. without power, without phones, without any of the things that normally filled their time. They were just stuck. 3 people in a cold house, waiting for the world to start working again. Sophie handled it best. She pulled out her coloring books and sprawled on the floor near the fireplace, humming to herself. Ethan tried to make the house more comfortable, layering blankets, rationing the firewood, checking on neighbors who weren't answering their doors. Vanessa sat on the couch, looking increasingly uncomfortable with having nothing to do. "You could color," Sophie suggested, holding up a crayon. "I don't color." "Why not?" "I'm an adult." Sophie considered this. "My daddy colors with me all the time. He's an adult." Vanessa glanced at Ethan, who was trying not to laugh. "Your daddy's different," Vanessa said. "How?" "He's patient." "What's patient mean?" "It means he doesn't lose his temper when things are difficult." Sophie thought about this seriously. "Do you lose your temper?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because people disappoint me." "That's sad," Sophie said, and went back to coloring. Ethan watched Vanessa's face, watched something flicker across it. Not quite guilt, not quite regret, something in between. By noon, the temperature in the house had dropped even more. Ethan found extra blankets, made Sophie wear 2 sweaters, kept the fireplace going. But it wasn't enough. The cold was the kind that got into your bones and stayed there. "We should conserve heat," he said. "Everyone stays in the living room. Close all the doors." But they huddled near this fireplace. Sophie in the middle, wrapped in blankets. Ethan on one side, Vanessa on the other. Close enough that their shoulders almost touched. It should have been uncomfortable. Instead, it was just necessary. "Tell me something," Vanessa said after a long silence. Ethan looked at her. "Like what?" "Something real. Something that matters." He wasn't sure what she was asking for, but the cold made him honest. Sophie's mom left when she was 2, just woke up one morning and decided she didn't want this life anymore. Didn't want to be a mother. Didn't want to be married to a guy who worked in logistics and came home tired every night. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She did us a favor." Better to know who someone really is than to waste time pretending. Massman. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then, "I was engaged once, long time ago. He wanted me to quit working. Said no man wanted a wife who was smarter than he was." "What did you do?" "Gave him back the ring. Bought Crestline stock with the money I saved not having a wedding." Ethan almost smiled. "Best investment you ever made?" "Second best. The best was firing him 6 months later when the board made me CEO." This time Ethan did laugh, and after a second Vanessa's mouth twitched like she might smile too. Sophie looked up at them. "Why are you laughing?" "Because sometimes people are ridiculous," Ethan said. "What's ridiculous mean?" "It means silly in a way that makes you want to shake your head." Sophie nodded seriously like she understood, then went back to her drawing. The afternoon brought new problems. They were running low on firewood. The food in the refrigerator was starting to go bad. And without power, they had no way to know when things would get better. Ethan bundled up and went outside to check on the elderly couple next door. Found them scared and cold. Their house even worse than his. He brought them back to his place, gave them blankets, made them tea on the gas stove. Vanessa watched him do it all without saying a word. By the time evening came, there were 6 people crowded around the fireplace. Ethan and Sophie, Vanessa. The elderly neighbors, Margaret and Bill, who kept thanking him every 5 minutes. It was cramped and cold and nothing like the life Vanessa was used to, but nobody was alone. Margaret made soup with what they had left in the pantry. Not much, just canned vegetables and some broth, but she stretched it far enough for everyone. They ate out of mismatched bowls, sitting on the floor because there weren't enough chairs. "This reminds me of when we were young," Margaret said to Bill. "Remember that winter the power went out for a week?" "We survived on canned beans and stubbornness," Bill said, smiling. "Still do," Margaret said, and they both laughed. Sophie leaned against Ethan, warm and safe, and asked him to tell a story. He made one up about a princess and a dragon, except the princess didn't need rescuing and the dragon just wanted someone to talk to. Vanessa sat very still, listening. Her face was hard to read in the firelight. When Sophie finally fell asleep, Ethan carried her to bed, tucking her in with every blanket he could find. When he came back out, Margaret and Bill had dozed off on the couch, and Vanessa was alone by the fire. "You're good at this," she said quietly. "At what?" "Taking care of people." Ethan sat down beside her. "It's not complicated. You just do what needs doing." "It's more complicated than you think. Only if you make it complicated." Vanessa stared into the flames. "At Crestline, if I show weakness, people take advantage. If I show kindness, they see it as permission to fail. I learned that the hard way." "Sophie asked you a question this morning," Ethan said, "about losing your temper. You said people disappoint you." "They do." "Maybe you're expecting the wrong things." Oh, Vanessa turned to look at him. "What should I expect?" "That people are human, that they make mistakes, that sometimes they need help instead of criticism. And what happens when their mistakes cost money? Cost jobs? Cost everything we've built? Then you help them fix it," Ethan said. "You don't just cut them loose. That's not how business works. Maybe business is broken." Vanessa shook her head. "You don't understand. The board is always watching. Shareholders are always demanding more. If I show any sign of softness, they'll replace me with someone harder." "So you became hard first?" "Yes. And now you're sitting in a cold house in the middle of a blackout. And the only reason you're not freezing in your car is because someone showed you kindness you didn't deserve." The words were harsh, but Ethan's voice wasn't. Just tired. Just honest. Vanessa didn't argue, didn't defend herself, just sat there staring at the fire, and for the first time since Ethan had known her, she looked like someone who might actually be capable of doubt. "I don't know how to be different," she said finally, so quiet he almost didn't hear her. "Start small," Ethan said. "Start with one person, one moment. See what happens." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the house settling around them. Outside, the world was still buried in snow. Inside, something was starting to shift, something neither of them had expected. The next morning brought sun, not warmth. The temperature was still below freezing, and the power was still out. But the storm had passed, leaving behind a world made of white and blue and blinding light. Ethan woke to find Vanessa already up, standing at the window again. She'd borrowed one of his old sweatshirts, too big on her, making her look smaller than she was. "Road should be clear by afternoon, Pesats," he said. "Good." But she didn't move from the window. They spent the morning digging out. Ethan cleared the driveway while Vanessa, surprising everyone including herself, helped Sophie build a snowman in the front yard. It was lopsided and falling apart, but Sophie was thrilled. "Look, Daddy, the snow lady knows how to make snow people." Ethan watched Vanessa trying to pack snow with hands that clearly had never done this before. Her expensive suit jacket ruined, her hair a mess, and something in his chest did a strange flip. She looked up and caught him staring. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just, you're actually smiling." Vanessa touched her face like she was surprised to find it was true. By noon, they heard the sound of snowplows on the main road. By 2 o'clock, Ethan's street was passable. By 3, Vanessa's phone had enough charge to make a call. She stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, and Ethan listened to her slip back into CEO mode. "I need a car. Now. I don't care what it costs." A pause. "Fine. Send it to this address." She rattled off Ethan's address from memory, and he realized she must have been paying attention when they'd arrived. She hung up and looked at him. "Car will be here in 40 minutes. That was fast. Money makes things fast. There it was again. That wall going back up, that armor sliding into place. Sophie appeared in the doorway, holding something behind her back. "Are you leaving?" "Yes." "But we didn't finish coloring." "I have to go back to work, Sophie." "Will you come back?" "Oh." Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Ethan like she was asking for help, but he just watched her, waiting to see what she'd say. "I don't think so," Vanessa said finally. Sophie's face fell. "Why not?" "Because I'm very busy." "Too busy to visit?" "Too busy to do a lot of things." Sophie thought about this, then pulled out what she'd been hiding. A drawing. Crude, the way kids' drawings are, but clearly made with love. Three stick figures standing in front of a house with a bright sun overhead. "I made this for you," Sophie said. "So you remember." "Remember what?" "That you have friends now." Vanessa took the drawing with hands that weren't quite steady. She stared at it for a long moment, and Ethan saw her throat work like she was trying to swallow something difficult. "Thank you," she said quietly. The car arrived exactly 40 minutes later. Blacktown car, driver in a suit, everything back to Vanessa's normal world. She'd changed back into her ruined clothes from the first night, looking uncomfortable but determined. She paused at the door, looking back at the small living room where they'd all huddled around the fire, where Margaret and Bill had told old stories, where Sophie had fallen asleep safe and warm. "Thank you," she said to Ethan, "for everything. You would have done the same." They both knew that was a lie, but Ethan said it anyway. Vanessa nodded once, then walked out to the waiting car. Ethan and Sophie stood in the doorway, watching her leave. "Daddy?" Sophie asked as the car disappeared down the street. "Why was she so sad?" "I don't know, baby. I think she's lonely." "Yeah," Ethan said, pulling Sophie close. "I think you're right." Monday morning came too fast. Power was back on by Sunday afternoon, and by Monday the city was pretending the storm had never happened. Roads were clear. Businesses were open. Everything back to normal except for the hundreds of people still without power in the outlying neighborhoods. Ethan dropped Sophie at school and drove to Crestline Tower, his stomach tight with anxiety. He'd left during an emergency order, disobeyed a direct command from the CEO. Vanessa had every reason to fire him, and probably would, but when he got to his desk, there was an email waiting. Not from HR, from Vanessa's office directly. "Report to the 42nd floor at 9 a.m. That was it. No context, no explanation. Ethan took the elevator up, his heart pounding. The executive floor was buzzing with activity. Assistants rushing around, phones ringing, everything moving at the speed Vanessa demanded. Her office door was open. Ethan knocked on the frame. "You wanted to see me?" Vanessa looked up from her computer, and her face was back to that cold, unreadable mask, like the last 3 days had never happened. "Close the door," she said. Ethan did, and his hands were shaking. This was it. He was about to lose everything. "I reviewed the storm response," Vanessa said. "Several employees disobeyed orders and left early Thursday night." "Yes, ma'am." "Including you." "Yes, ma'am." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, studying him. "I should fire you. I understand. But I'm not going to." Ethan blinked. "What?" "You heard me. You're not fired." She pulled up something on her computer. "In fact, I'm moving you. Logistics is losing its director next month. I want you to take the position." What?" "It's a promotion, Mr. Cole. Director-level pay. Better benefits. Your own office." She met his eyes. "You'll report directly to me." Ethan couldn't process what he was hearing. "Why?" "Because you're good at your job. Because you know how to make decisions under pressure. Because when things went wrong, you didn't panic. But I disobeyed you." "Yes, you did." Vanessa's expression didn't change. "And you were right to. That order was wrong. I was wrong." The admission hung in the air between them, huge and impossible. "I don't understand," Ethan said. "You don't have to. Just accept the promotion." Vanessa turned back to her computer, dismissing him. "HR will have the paperwork ready this afternoon." Ethan stood there for another moment, trying to figure out what had just happened, trying to see past that mask to the woman who'd eaten soup on his living room floor, who'd built a lopsided snowman with his daughter. "Miss Hale? Yes?" "Thank you." Something flickered in her eyes, too quick to catch. Then it was gone. "That's all, Mr. Cole." He left, more confused than ever. The week that followed was strange. Ethan moved into his new office, started learning the director role, tried to wrap his head around the fact that his life had changed overnight. His salary had nearly doubled. Sophie could go to a better school now. They could afford things that had been impossible before. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He barely saw Vanessa. She was back to her old patterns, first one in, last one out, moving through the building like a force of nature. When their paths did cross, she was professional, distant, all business. Like those 3 days in his house had never happened. Except sometimes, he'd catch her watching him across a conference room. Or she'd pause outside his office like she wanted to say something, then change her mind and keep walking. Friday afternoon, he found an envelope on his desk. Inside was a check, made out to him, for $10,000. The memo line said, "For expenses incurred during storm assistance." Ethan stared at it, something cold settling in his gut. Then he walked straight to the executive floor. Vanessa's assistant tried to stop him. "Mr. Cole, she's in a meeting." "I don't care." He pushed past her and into Vanessa's office. She was on a video call, and her eyes went wide when she saw him. "I'll call you back," she said to the screen, and disconnected. Ethan threw the check on her desk. "What is this?" "Reimbursement." "For what?" "Food, utilities, your time." "My time?" Ethan's voice was rising. "You're paying me for my time?" "That's how employment works. I didn't help you because I wanted to be paid. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. Sim. Vanessa stood up, her own voice going cold. "And now I'm compensating you appropriately for that help. What's the problem?" "The problem is you're turning it into a transaction." "Everything is a transaction, Mr. Cole. Not everything." Ethan leaned forward, hands on her desk. "Not what happened that weekend. Not Sophie giving you that drawing. Not any of it. You're being emotional." "Yeah, I am, because apparently I'm the only one who is." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "You need to leave my office." "What are you so afraid of?" "I'm not afraid of anything." "Liar." The word came out harder than Ethan intended. "You're terrified. That weekend, you were human. You smiled. You let your guard down. And now you're so scared of feeling that again that you're trying to turn it into just another business deal. That's enough. Sophie asked if you'd come back, if you'd visit. You know what I told her?" Vanessa didn't answer. "I told her you were probably too busy, that important people don't have time for regular people." Ethan straightened up. "Turns out I was right." He turned to leave. "Wait." Ethan stopped, but didn't turn around. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice was different, quieter, more like the woman who'd sat by his fireplace. "That weekend was difficult for me." "Why?" "Because I don't know how to be that person and this person at the same time." Ethan turned to look at her. She was standing very still, her hands at her sides, and for the first time since Monday, he could see past the mask. "You don't have to choose," he said. "You can be both." "Can I?" Vanessa looked down at her desk, at the reports and contracts and all the armor of her corporate life. "Because every time I've ever shown weakness in this building, someone has tried to use it against me." "I'm not trying to use anything against you." "Then what do you want?" Ethan thought about it, about the woman who'd beaten eggs in his kitchen, who'd built a snowman with hands that had never touched snow before, who'd listened to Margaret and Bill's old stories like they were the most important thing in the world. "I want you to remember that it's possible," he said. "That's all. Just remember it's possible to be human." He left before she could respond, the check still sitting on her desk. That night, Ethan's phone rang at 10 o'clock. Unknown number. "Hello?" "It's me." Vanessa's voice, quiet, tired. "Ms. Hale? Can you—" She paused. "Can you stop calling me that when we're not at work?" Ethan sat down slowly. "Okay, Vanessa." A long silence. Then, "Sophie drew me a picture." "I know. I hung it in my office." "Did you?" "My assistant asked me who drew it. I told her a friend." Another pause. "I've never called anyone a friend before, not since I was a kid." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. "I'm not good at this," Vanessa said. "At what?" "At being not alone. Nobody's good at it at first." "How do I learn?" "You show up," Ethan said. "That's it. You just show up." Vanessa was quiet for so long he thought she'd hung up. Then, "Can I come over tomorrow? I could bring lunch. For you and Sophie." Ethan smiled. "Yeah, you can come over." "Ethan, what should I bring?" "Doesn't matter. Just yourself." "What if that's not enough?" "Vanessa," Ethan said gently, "it's enough." When he hung up, he sat there for a long time, staring at his phone, wondering what he'd just started, wondering if it was a mistake, wondering if it was possible to bridge the gap between her world and his. But mostly, he thought about Sophie's words, about how Vanessa had looked when she'd said them. You have friends now. Maybe it was that simple. Maybe it was just about showing up, about being human, about remembering that underneath all the armor and fear and loneliness, everyone was just trying to figure out how to connect. Outside, the city lights glittered in the cold night air. Inside, something was beginning that neither of them fully understood yet, something that felt dangerous and necessary and real. Saturday morning, Ethan woke up nervous. He'd cleaned the house twice already, which was ridiculous because Vanessa had seen it at its worst during the storm. But somehow, this felt different, more deliberate. She was choosing to come here now, not trapped by circumstance. That made it matter more. Sophie was bouncing around the living room by 10 o'clock, practically vibrating with excitement. Is she coming soon? Is she bringing food? Can we show her my new drawing? Baby, calm down. She'll be here when she gets here. But when's that? Noon, she said. Sophie groaned like that was an eternity away. Ethan understood the feeling. His own stomach was doing uncomfortable things, and he wasn't entirely sure why. This was just lunch, just a former CEO trying to figure out how to be a regular person. Nothing complicated about that. Except everything about it felt complicated. At 11:45, a car pulled up outside. Not the black town car from last weekend. Just a normal sedan. Silver. A few years old. Vanessa climbed out carrying 2 paper bags, and she was wearing jeans. Actual jeans. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. You're early, he said. I didn't know how long it would take. Traffic was lighter than I expected. Vanessa held up the bags. I brought sandwiches. I wasn't sure what Sophie liked, so I got 3 different kinds. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. Sophie appeared behind Ethan, peeking around his legs. You came back. Something in Vanessa's expression softened. I said I would. Did you bring the picture I made you? It's hanging in my office. Sophie beamed and grabbed Vanessa's hand, pulling her inside. Come see what I made this week. I drew our house and the snowman and everything. Ethan watched Vanessa let herself be dragged toward the refrigerator where Sophie's new drawings were displayed. She was awkward with it, uncertain, but she was trying. That was something. They ate lunch at the kitchen table, Sophie talking nonstop about school and her friends, and a boy named Marcus who kept pulling her hair. Vanessa listened with the kind of focused attention most people reserve for board meetings. Why does he pull your hair? She asked. Teacher says it means he likes me. That's terrible logic, Vanessa said. If someone likes you, they should be kind to you, not hurt you. Sophie considered this. What if they don't know how to be kind? Then they need to learn. How do they learn? Vanessa glanced at Ethan, and something passed between them. An understanding, a shared memory of cold houses and awkward conversations, and stumbling towards something neither of them knew how to do. Someone shows them, Vanessa said quietly. Someone patient. After lunch, Sophie insisted on teaching Vanessa how to play the card game she'd learned at school. It involved rules that changed every 3 minutes and made no logical sense, but Vanessa played along without complaint. You're losing, Sophie announced cheerfully. I've noticed. It's okay. Daddy loses too. That's very comforting, Vanessa said, and there was the ghost of a smile on her face. They played for an hour before Sophie got distracted by something on TV. Ethan and Vanessa moved to the kitchen while Sophie watched cartoons, and suddenly they were alone together in a way that felt both natural and terrifying. Vanessa stood at the sink washing dishes without being asked. You don't have to do that, Ethan said. I know, but I'm doing it anyway. You're full of surprises lately. Guessy. So are you. Vanessa rinsed a plate, set it in the drying rack. That promotion. You're doing well with it. It's a lot. You'll manage. You're good with people. They trust you. Unlike you. Vanessa's hands stilled in the soapy water. Is that what people say? It's what people think. They respect you, fear you, but trust. Ethan shook his head. That's harder. I know. You could change that. Could I? Vanessa pulled her hands from the water, dried them on a towel. Every time I've tried to be less harsh, someone has seen it as weakness. Someone has tried to take advantage. So you became someone nobody could take advantage of. Yes, and now you're alone. The words landed hard. Vanessa flinched just slightly, but Ethan saw it. I'm sorry, he said. That was true, Vanessa interrupted. That was true. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. After my father died, the board tried to force me out. I was 22, grief-stricken, emotional. They thought I'd be easy to manipulate. What happened? I learned to stop being emotional. I studied every contract, every financial statement, every piece of leverage I could find. And when they came at me, I was ready. Her jaw tightened. I took 3 of them down in the process. Made sure everyone knew what happens when you underestimate me. You've been fighting ever since. Because if I stop fighting, I lose everything. Or, Ethan said carefully, you could stop seeing everything as a fight. Set. Vanessa looked at him like he'd suggested she start breathing underwater. You don't understand how business works. Maybe not, but I understand how people work. He moved closer, not touching, just present. You're so busy protecting yourself that you can't see when someone's actually trying to help you. People don't help without wanting something in return. I helped you. What did I want? Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't have an answer. That weekend during the storm, Ethan continued, you were human. You let Sophie give you that drawing. You sat with Margaret and Bill and listened to their stories. You built a snowman in my front yard. He paused, and nothing bad happened. Nobody took advantage. Nobody tried to hurt you. That was different. How? Because we were trapped. Because it was temporary. Because... She stopped, frustrated. Because it wasn't real. It felt real to me. Well, it wasn't. Real life is Crestline Tower. Real life is board meetings and quarterly reports and people looking for any sign of weakness they can exploit. Then maybe you need a different real life. Vanessa laughed, but it was bitter. Easy for you to say? You have Sophie. You have neighbors who care about you. You have a life that makes sense. And you have an office full of people who are terrified of you. Better than being pitied. Yeah? Is it? Ethan challenged. Is it really better to be feared than to be loved? The question hung between them. Vanessa looked away, out the window to where the afternoon sun was turning the leftover snow into something that glittered. I don't know how to be loved, she said finally, so quiet he almost didn't hear her. You learn, Ethan said, same way you learned everything else, one day at a time. Before Vanessa could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway. Are you guys fighting? No, baby, Ethan said quickly. Just talking. Sophie looked skeptical. It sounded like fighting. Sometimes adults have difficult conversations, Vanessa said. That doesn't mean we're fighting. Oh, Sophie thought about this. Can we go outside? I want to show you how to make snow angels. Vanessa glanced at Ethan, uncertain. Go, he said. I'll clean up here. 20 minutes later, Ethan looked out the window to see Vanessa lying in the snow, arms and legs moving back and forth, while Sophie gave her instructions on proper snow angel technique. Vanessa's coat was covered in white, her hair was a mess, and she was laughing. Actually, laughing. Ethan grabbed his phone and took a picture before he could think better of it. Not to share. Not to post somewhere, just to have. Just to remember that this version of Vanessa Hale existed, even if she didn't believe it herself. When they came back inside, both of them were freezing and wet and grinning. I made 3 snow angels, Sophie announced. Vanessa only made 1, but it was pretty good for a first try. High praise, Ethan said, handing them towels. Vanessa stood in his living room, shivering and damp, and something in her expression was different, lighter, like she'd put down something heavy she'd been carrying for a long time. Thank you, she said to Sophie, for teaching me. You're welcome. Do you want to stay for dinner? Vanessa looked at Ethan, and he could see the war in her eyes. The part that wanted to stay fighting with the part that knew she should leave. That knew this was getting dangerous. That knew they were crossing lines that would be hard to uncross. I should probably go, she said. Sophie's face fell. But you just got here. I've been here for 5 hours, sweetheart. That's not very long. It's longer than I usually spend anywhere that isn't my office. That's sad, Sophie said, with the brutal honesty only kids possess. Vanessa crouched down to Sophie's level. You're right, it is sad, but I'm trying to change that. Will you come back next week? If your dad doesn't mind. They both looked at Ethan. He knew he should say something cautious, something that kept appropriate distance, something that acknowledged this was his boss, and there were professional boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Instead, he said, "You're welcome here anytime." Vanessa stood up slowly, and the look she gave him was complicated, grateful and scared, and something else he couldn't quite name. "I'll call you," she said. "Okay." She left, and the house felt emptier than it had before she arrived. The next week at Crestline was strange in new ways. Vanessa was still Vanessa in meetings, still sharp, still demanding, still the CEO who made department heads sweat. But there were small changes, tiny shifts that most people probably didn't notice. She started saying thank you more. Not sarcastically, actually meaning it. She stopped sending emails at 2 in the morning, which meant other people stopped feeling obligated to respond at 2 in the morning. And once, Ethan watched her tell someone their work was good instead of just pointing out what was wrong with it. "Did she just give positive feedback?" Marcus whispered during a logistics meeting. "I think so," Ethan whispered back. "Is she sick? Maybe she's just learning." But the changes weren't smooth, weren't easy. Vanessa was fighting herself every step of the way, and Ethan could see it. Could see her catch herself being harsh, then overcorrect and be awkward instead. Could see her trying to connect with people who'd spent years learning to avoid her. Thursday afternoon, she showed up at Ethan's office door. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." She closed the door behind her, which made Ethan nervous. Closed doors in corporate buildings usually meant bad news. "I need your help," Vanessa said. "With what?" "The quarterly reviews are coming up. I usually conduct them myself, but..." She hesitated. "People hate them. They leave my office looking like they've been hit by a truck." "That's because you tell them everything they're doing wrong." "I tell them the truth." "You tell them the negative truth. You never balance it with the positive truth." Vanessa frowned. "Positive truth?" "The things they're doing right, the ways they've improved, the reasons you haven't fired them." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Everyone knows what they're bad at, Vanessa. They lie awake at night worrying about it. What they need is someone to tell them what they're good at, too." That feels like coddling. It's called motivation. People work harder when they feel valued, not when they feel worthless. Vanessa absorbed this, and Ethan could see her processing it like a new business strategy, testing it against her existing worldview, looking for flaws in the logic. "Will you sit in on the reviews with me?" she asked. "Help me not destroy everyone's self-esteem? You want me in the room when you're evaluating people?" "I trust you. You're good at this." She paused. "And I'm clearly not." Wait. The admission was huge, Vanessa admitting she wasn't good at something, asking for help instead of faking confidence. "Okay," Ethan said. "I'll help." The first review was Gerald Moss, the operations VP who'd challenged Vanessa before the storm. He walked into the conference room looking like he was heading to his own execution. "Gerald," Vanessa said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit." He sat. Ethan sat across from him, and Vanessa remained standing because old habits died hard. "Your Q1 numbers were better, Vanessa started. Gerald tensed. "Significantly better," Vanessa continued, and Ethan could hear her forcing the words out. "You brought logistics costs down 6% while maintaining service quality. That's impressive." Gerald blinked. Thank you? There are still areas that need improvement." Ethan cleared his throat. Vanessa stopped, regrouped. "But overall, you've made real progress. The supply chain restructuring you proposed is solid. I'd like you to implement it next quarter." "Really?" "Yes, really." Vanessa looked at Ethan like she was checking whether she'd done it right. He gave her a small nod. The review continued, and Ethan watched Vanessa struggle through giving balanced feedback. It wasn't natural for her. She had to stop herself from ripping into every mistake, had to consciously add positive comments, had to remember that Gerald was a human being who needed encouragement, not just correction. When Gerald left, He looked confused, but less traumatized than usual. "How did I do?" Vanessa asked. "Better. Still a little harsh, but better." "This is exhausting." "Being human usually is." They did 4 more reviews that afternoon. Each one got slightly easier. By the last one, Vanessa was almost comfortable with the format, almost able to deliver criticism without making it feel like a personal attack. "I never realized how much energy it takes," she said after the last person left. "What do you mean?" "Caring about their feelings, thinking about how my words land, balancing honesty with kindness." She rubbed her temples. "I used to just say what needed to be said and move on." "And how did that work out?" "Everyone hated me, but the work got done." "And now?" Vanessa thought about it. "The work still gets done, but maybe people don't hate me quite as much." "Progress," Ethan said. That Saturday, Vanessa came over again. And the Saturday after that. It became a routine neither of them discussed, but both of them needed. She'd show up around noon with food, because cooking was still beyond her. Sophie would drag her into whatever activity she'd been planning all week. They'd spend the afternoon doing normal things that Vanessa had never done before. Baking cookies and burning half of them. Watching kids' movies that made Sophie laugh and Vanessa quietly emotional. Playing board games where Sophie made up rules and Vanessa tried to follow them. And slowly, carefully, Vanessa started to relax. Started to let her guard down in ways that made Ethan's chest tight. One afternoon, she fell asleep on the couch while Sophie was coloring on the floor. Just dozed off, like her body had finally decided it was safe enough to rest. Ethan covered her with the blanket and let her sleep. And when she woke up 2 hours later, she looked embarrassed. "I can't believe I did that." "When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "I don't know. A while." "Your body needed it." Vanessa touched the blanket he'd put over her. "No one's done that since I was a kid." "Done what?" "Taken care of me when I was vulnerable." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. He thought about this woman who'd built walls so high nobody could reach her, who'd convinced herself that needing anyone was weakness, who'd spent years running from the very thing she needed most. "You're allowed to be vulnerable here," he said. "You know that, right?" "I'm starting to, so she is." February became March. The snow melted, leaving everything brown and muddy and waiting for spring. At Crestline, Vanessa's changes were becoming more visible. More people were smiling in the hallways. The atmosphere was still professional, still demanding, but less suffocating. Marcus stopped by Ethan's office one afternoon with a strange expression. "Did Vanessa Hale just ask me how my kid's soccer game went?" "Probably." "She remembered my kid plays soccer?" "She's trying." Marcus shook his head. "I don't know what you did to her during that storm, man, but whatever it was, keep doing it." "I didn't do anything." "Liar, she's different. Everyone sees it. And the rumor mill says she's been spending weekends at your place." Ethan's stomach dropped. "People are talking?" "Of course people are talking. The Ice Queen thawing out, that's headline news." But Marcus studied him. "Should we be worried?" "About what?" "About you. About what happens if this goes badly. She's still the CEO. You're still an employee. That's a power dynamic that could crush you if it breaks wrong." "Nothing's going to break." You sure about that?" Ethan wasn't sure about anything anymore, but he wasn't about to admit that out loud. That evening, Vanessa called him later than usual, almost 11. "Can I ask you something?" she said without preamble. "Sure." "Do you ever regret it? Helping me that night?" "No." "Why would I?" "Because your life was simpler before, and now it's complicated because I'm in it." Ethan could hear something fragile in her voice, something scared. "My life is better with you in it," he said carefully, "even if it's more complicated." "Why?" "Because you're trying, because you're learning, because watching you figure out how to be human is..." He stopped, trying to find the right words. "It matters. You matter." Silence on the other end, long enough that Ethan thought she might have hung up. Then, "People at work are talking about us." "I know." "Does that bother you?" "Does it bother you?" I don't know," Vanessa admitted. "I'm not used to caring what people think, but I care what you think, and I care what Sophie thinks, and that's terrifying." "Why is it terrifying?" "Because if I care about you, you can hurt me, and I've spent my entire adult life making sure nobody could hurt me." Ethan understood what she wasn't saying, understood the risk she was taking just by admitting that. I'm not going to hurt you, he said. You can't promise that. No, I can't. Whatever this is, I'm in it honestly. What is this, Vanessa asked. What are we doing? What? It was the question Ethan had been avoiding for weeks. The one he didn't have a good answer for because the answer was complicated and messy and didn't fit into neat categories. I don't know, he said finally, but I know I don't want to stop. Neither do I. Then let's just keep going, see where it leads. That's not a plan. No, Ethan agreed, it's not. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need a plan. Vanessa laughed softly, and it sounded tired but genuine. You're teaching me to be comfortable with uncertainty. You realize how ironic that is. Life's full of irony. Apparently, they talked for another hour about nothing important, about Sophie's school play, about a book Vanessa was reading, about whether spring would ever actually arrive. Normal things, easy things. The kind of conversation people have when they're comfortable with each other. When they finally hung up, Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what he'd gotten himself into. Vanessa Hale was still his boss, still one of the most powerful people in the city, still capable of destroying his career with a single decision. But she was also the woman who built lopsided snowmen with his daughter, who fell asleep on his couch because she finally felt safe enough to rest, who was learning how to be kind even though it went against every instinct she'd developed over the past decade. And somewhere along the way, without meaning to, without planning it, Ethan had started to care about her. Not just care, something deeper, something that made his chest tight when she smiled, something that made him want to protect her from all the people who'd taught her to be so afraid of vulnerability. It was dangerous. He knew that. Knew that this could end badly in 100 different ways. Knew that mixing personal and professional was asking for trouble. But he also knew he wasn't going to stop. Because Vanessa was worth the risk. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, and Vanessa had been dreading it for 3 days. She stood in her office an hour early, reviewing the quarterly reports one more time, trying to find flaws in her own analysis before the board could find them first. The numbers were solid, better than solid. Crestline had its best quarter in 2 years. But that wasn't what made her nervous. Robert Hutchins would be there, the board member who'd tried to force her out after her father died, the one who'd never forgiven her for surviving his attempt to take control. He'd been quiet for years, watching and waiting for any sign of weakness he could exploit. And lately, Vanessa had given him plenty to watch. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Good luck today. You've got this. Something in her chest loosened slightly. She typed back, how do you always know when I need to hear that? Because you get quiet, and you never get quiet unless you're worried. Vanessa smiled despite herself, then caught her reflection in the window, smiling at her phone like a teenager. The old Vanessa would have been disgusted. The new one didn't know what to think. The boardroom was on the 43rd floor, all dark wood and leather chairs, and the kind of expensive minimalism that was supposed to intimidate. Vanessa arrived first, as always, setting up her presentation, checking the connections, making sure nothing could go wrong technically because she couldn't control what would go wrong politically. The board members filtered in over the next 20 minutes. Most of them nodded at her with professional distance. A few smiled, which was new. Robert Hutchins was last to arrive, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He didn't smile. Vanessa, he said, sitting directly across from her. Looking forward to your presentation. The words were polite. The tone was predatory. Vanessa started the meeting with the quarterly results. Revenue up 18%. Operating costs down 12%. Customer satisfaction at an all-time high. Every metric they cared about was trending positive. She should have felt confident. Instead, she felt exposed. Impressive numbers, Robert said when she finished. I'm curious about the methodology changes. Which changes specifically? The ones in logistics. I notice you restructured the entire department. New director, new protocols, new expense allocations. He leaned forward slightly. That's a significant shift in operations without board approval. The restructuring fell within my operational authority. Did it? Because, by my calculation, you increased payroll by nearly 15% in that department alone. Vanessa kept her expression neutral. We brought salaries in line with industry standards. Retention was becoming a problem. Retention, Robert smiled. Or favoritism? The room went quiet. Every board member suddenly very interested in their notepads. I'm not sure what you're implying, Vanessa said carefully. I think you know exactly what I'm implying. You promoted Ethan Cole from a mid-level logistics position to director in a matter of weeks. Gave him a salary increase that put him in the top 20% of company compensation. And from what I hear, you've been spending quite a bit of personal time with Mr. Cole and his daughter. Vanessa's pulse spiked, but she forced herself to stay calm. My personal life is not relevant to this discussion. It is when it affects your professional judgment, when it costs this company money, when it suggests that our CEO is making decisions based on emotions rather than business sense. The logistics department is performing better than it has in 5 years. Because you're motivated to make your boyfriend look good. The word landed like a slap. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. Mr. Cole is not my boyfriend, Vanessa said, her voice ice. He's a talented director who earned his promotion through competence and results. If you'd like to review his performance metrics, I'd be happy to provide them. I've reviewed them. They're fine, but fine doesn't justify the speed of his rise. Robert pulled out a tablet, started scrolling. I also reviewed your calendar. You've been leaving early on Saturdays, declining evening meetings, taking personal calls during work hours. All very unlike you, Vanessa. All starting around the same time Mr. Cole entered your life. I'm entitled to a personal life. Not one that compromises your judgment. Not one that makes this board question whether you're still capable of leading this company objectively. My judgment is not compromised. Then prove it. Robert leaned back, that predator smile spreading wider. The logistics department needs to be restructured again. We have an opportunity to outsource 40% of our distribution network to a firm in Texas. It would save us millions annually. I propose we move forward with it immediately. Vanessa's stomach dropped. That would eliminate hundreds of jobs. Exactly, including most of Mr. Cole's department, including potentially Mr. Cole himself. The trap snapped shut around her. Robert had set this up perfectly. Either she agreed to the outsourcing and proved her judgment wasn't compromised by personal feelings, or she refused and confirmed everything he'd just accused her of. This isn't about efficiency, Vanessa said. This is about you trying to prove I'm too emotional to lead. This is about profits, about shareholder value, about making smart business decisions. Robert looked around the table. All in favor of exploring the Texas outsourcing option? 5 hands went up, 6 including Robert's, more than half the board. Vanessa felt something crack inside her chest. This requires full analysis, she said. Job impact studies, cost-benefit projections beyond just the immediate savings. I won't approve cutting hundreds of jobs without understanding the full implications. Then you have 1 week to provide that analysis. And if you can't give us a compelling reason to keep those positions, we move forward with the outsourcing. Agreed? Vanessa met his eyes across the table, saw the satisfaction there, eyes across, the certainty that he had her cornered. Agreed, she said. The meeting continued for another hour, but Vanessa barely heard any of it. Her mind was racing, trying to find a way out of the trap Robert had built, trying to figure out how to save jobs without looking like she was saving them just to protect Ethan. When everyone finally left, she sat alone in the boardroom, staring at the presentation screen that still showed her successful quarter results. All of it meaningless now. Her phone rang. Ethan. She almost didn't answer, almost couldn't bear to hear his voice knowing what she might have to do. But she picked up anyway. How'd it go? He asked. Not great. What happened? Vanessa closed her eyes. Can we talk tonight, after Sophie goes to bed? That bad? Worse. A pause, then, I'll be here. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. But that was the problem. They couldn't figure this out together. This was exactly what Robert was counting on. Vanessa making decisions based on feelings instead of logic, choosing Ethan over the company, proving she was compromised. I have to go, she said. I'll call you later. She hung up before he could respond, before the concern in his voice could make her do something stupid like cry. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings she couldn't focus on, emails she read 3 times without absorbing, decisions she kept postponing. By 6 o'clock, most of the building had cleared out. Vanessa stayed at her desk, running numbers, looking for alternatives, trying to find a way to make this work that didn't involve choosing between her job and the people she'd started to care about. There wasn't one. The outsourcing made financial sense. Robert was right about that, at least. It would save money. Lots of money. And in business, money was the only argument that mattered. Except it wasn't. Not anymore. Somewhere over the past few months, Vanessa had started seeing her employees differently. Not as line items on a spreadsheet, but as people. People with families and mortgages and kids who needed to eat. People like Margaret and Bill who'd shared their soup during the blackout. People like Ethan, who'd built a life out of nothing and couldn't afford to start over. The old Vanessa would have made the cuts without hesitation, would have seen it as necessary, practical, the smart business decision. The new Vanessa couldn't do it. But refusing meant giving Robert exactly what he wanted. Proof that she was too emotional, too compromised, too weak to lead. She was still sitting there at 8 o'clock when her phone rang again. Ethan probably wondering why she hadn't called like she'd promised. But it wasn't Ethan. It was an unknown number. Vanessa Hale beat seat. Ms. Hale, this is Janet from County General Hospital. We have an Ethan Cole here who listed you as an emergency contact. Vanessa's entire world stopped. What happened? He was in a car accident about an hour ago. He's stable, but he's asking for you. I'm on my way. Blah. She was out the door before the call even ended, not bothering with her coat, not locking her office, not thinking about anything except getting to Ethan. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely get her key in the ignition. The hospital was 20 minutes across the city, and she made it in 12, breaking every traffic law that existed. The emergency room was chaos, fluorescent lights and crying children and the smell of antiseptic. Vanessa pushed through to the desk, probably looking insane, her voice sharp with panic. Ethan Cole, where is he? The nurse checked her computer. Room 7. Through those doors, take a left. Vanessa found him sitting on an examination table holding an ice pack to his head. His shirt was torn, blood on his face, but alive, whole, breathing. What the hell happened? She demanded. Ethan looked up and something in his expression broke. Vanessa, you came. Of course I came. What happened? Guy ran a red light, T-boned me right in the intersection. He touched his forehead gently. Airbag gave me a concussion, some cuts, nothing serious. Where's Sophie? With Mrs. Chen from next door. I called her before the ambulance took me. Vanessa moved closer, her hands hovering near his face, but not quite touching, like she was afraid he'd break. You scared me. I scared myself. Ethan managed a weak smile. But I'm okay. Really. You're not okay. You're sitting in an emergency room covered in blood. Most of it's dried. That counts for something. Vanessa made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Then, without thinking about it, without questioning it, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him carefully, mindful of his injuries. Ethan went very still. Then his arms came up around her, and they stood there in that sterile hospital room, holding each other, not saying anything because there was nothing to say. When Vanessa finally pulled back, her eyes were wet. Don't do that again, she said. I'll try to avoid car accidents. I'm serious. When they called, I thought... She stopped, swallowed hard. I thought I'd lost you, and I realized how much that would destroy me. Ethan reached up and brushed tears off her face with his thumb. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Promise me. Boss. I promise. A doctor came in then, explaining discharge procedures and concussion protocols. Ethan needed observation overnight. Someone had to stay with him. Wake him every few hours to make sure he was responsive. I'll do it, Vanessa said immediately. The doctor looked surprised. Are you family? Yes, Vanessa lied without hesitation. I'm his partner. Ethan glanced at her, something complicated crossing his face, but he didn't contradict her. They took a cab back to Ethan's house. Sophie was asleep on Mrs. Chen's couch, and the elderly woman looked exhausted. Thank you for watching her, Ethan said. Of course, dear. Are you all right? I will be. Mrs. Chen looked at Vanessa with knowing eyes. You're a good friend, taking care of him like this. He's taken care of me plenty, Vanessa said quietly. After Mrs. Chen left, they got Sophie into her own bed without waking her. Then Ethan collapsed on his couch, and Vanessa sat beside him, both of them silent and drained. You called me your partner, Ethan said finally. I panicked. Did you? Vanessa looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd saved her from a storm and then kept saving her in 100 smaller ways. Who'd taught her that being human wasn't weakness? Who'd shown her what it felt like to be cared for without conditions? No, she admitted. I didn't panic. I just said what I was thinking. What were you thinking? What Thomas Sabot. That you matter to me. That Sophie matters to me. That the thought of losing you made me realize I don't want to go back to the life I had before. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. There's something you're not telling me about the board meeting. Vanessa tensed. She'd almost forgotten about that disaster and the chaos of the accident. Almost let herself believe they could avoid it. Not tonight, she said. Tonight you need to rest. Vanessa, please, just let me take care of you tonight. Tomorrow, we can deal with everything else. He searched her face, and she knew he could see she was hiding something, but he was too tired to push. Okay, he said. Tomorrow. Vanessa set an alarm for every 2 hours. Each time it went off, she woke Ethan gently, asked him the standard questions. His name, the date, where he was. Each time he answered correctly, then fell back asleep. Around 3 in the morning, after the second wake-up, he grabbed her hand before she could move away. Stay, he mumbled, still half asleep. Don't want you on the floor. Vanessa hesitated, then carefully lay down beside him on the couch. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but Ethan's arm came around her and she could hear his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. She didn't sleep, just lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe, trying to memorize this moment before everything fell apart, because it would fall apart. She knew that now. There was no scenario where she kept her job and kept Ethan and kept any kind of moral integrity intact. Robert had made sure of that. Either she authorized the outsourcing and destroyed hundreds of lives to prove she could make hard business decisions, or she refused and got removed from her position for being too emotional, for letting personal relationships cloud her judgment. She'd spent 10 years building walls to protect herself from exactly this, from caring so much that it could be used against her, from being vulnerable enough that someone could hurt her. And then Ethan had shown up with his terrible pickup truck and his patient kindness, and his daughter, who thought snow ladies could learn to be human, and Vanessa had let those walls crumble without even realizing what she was giving up. Now she was here, lying on a couch in a house that would never be featured in Architectural Digest, with a man who would never understand board politics and shareholder value, about to lose everything she'd spent her adult life building. And the terrifying part was that she wasn't sure she cared. When morning came, pale light filtering through the curtains, Ethan woke up properly. His head hurt worse than yesterday, but his eyes were clear, focused. You stayed, he said, seeing Vanessa still beside him. I told you I would. All night? The doctor said observation. I observed. Ethan smiled, then winced because smiling hurt. You're a terrible liar. What do you mean? You cared. You were worried. And it cost you something to stay here instead of going home. Vanessa sat up, immediately missing his warmth. It didn't cost me anything. Now you're lying again. Ethan struggled to sit up, and Vanessa helped him without thinking. Tell me what happened at the board meeting. There was no avoiding it now. No more delays. Vanessa took a breath and told him everything. Robert's accusations, the outsourcing proposal, the trap she'd walked right into. When she finished, Ethan was quiet for a long time. How many jobs? He asked finally. Around 300, maybe more depending on the final structure. Including mine? Probably. And if you say no to the outsourcing, Robert will use it as proof I'm compromised. The board will vote to replace me. Someone else will take over and authorize the cuts anyway. Ethan processed this, his jaw tight. So either way, people lose their jobs. Yes, but if you authorize it, you keep your position. That's the idea. What are you going to do? Vanessa looked at him. At this man who'd somehow become the center of her world without her permission, who'd shown her there was more to life than quarterly reports and shareholder value, who'd made her want to be someone different. I don't know, she said honestly. Yes, you do. Ethan, you know what the right choice is. You're just scared to make it. Because the right choice destroys everything. Everything you've been hiding behind, maybe, but not everything that actually matters. Vanessa stood up, frustrated, pacing the small living room. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who has to make this decision. You're right, I'm not. But I know you, Vanessa. I've watched you change over these past few months. I've seen you learn how to care about people, how to value them as humans instead of resources. And I know you can't go back to being the person who would cut 300 jobs without feeling anything. Feeling something doesn't change the business reality. No, but it changes whether you can live with yourself after. The words hit hard. Vanessa stopped pacing, staring out the window at the street where kids were riding bikes, where neighbors were chatting on porches, where life was happening in ways that had nothing to do with corporate politics and power games. If I refuse the outsourcing, I lose Crestline, she said quietly. Everything my father built, everything I've spent 10 years protecting. And if you authorize it, you lose yourself. Myself? Vanessa laughed bitterly. I've spent so long being the person Crestline needed me to be, I don't even know who myself is anymore. Yes, you do. Ethan stood up carefully, crossing to her. She's the person who built snow angels with my daughter, who fell asleep on my couch because she finally felt safe, who showed up at a hospital in a panic because she thought she might lose someone she cared about. That person doesn't know how to run a company. But maybe that person doesn't need to run a company. Maybe that person just needs to run her own life. Vanessa turned to face him. Are you seriously suggesting I just quit? I'm suggesting you consider what you actually want. Not what you think you should want. Not what you've been told you should want. What you actually want. I want... Vanessa stopped, because she didn't know how to finish that sentence. For 10 years, she'd wanted Crestline, wanted success, wanted to prove everyone wrong who doubted her. But now, standing in Ethan's living room with morning light streaming through cheap curtains and children's drawings covering the refrigerator, she wanted something different. She wanted this life. These people, this feeling of being connected to something real instead of something she'd built to protect herself from being hurt. I can't just walk away, she said, but there was no conviction behind it. Why not? Because it's irresponsible. Because hundreds of people depend on Crestline for their livelihood. Because you're scared, Ethan interrupted gently. You're scared that if you're not the CEO of Crestline Holdings, you're nobody. That all you have is that job and that title and those walls you built. Aren't you? No. Ethan moved closer, his hands finding hers. You're the person who figured out how to make snow angels. You're the person Sophie draws pictures for. You're the person who spent all night on an uncomfortable couch making sure I was okay. That's who you are. Not a title, not a company. You. Vanessa felt something crack wide open in her chest. Something that had been holding back tears and fear and all the messy emotions she'd been trained to ignore. I don't know how to do that, she whispered. I don't know how to be just me. You learn, same way you learned everything else. Ethan squeezed her hands. And you don't have to do it alone. A sound from Sophie's room interrupted them. The little girl appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, still in her pajamas. Daddy, why are you home? Why does your face look funny? I had an accident, baby, but I'm okay. Sophie noticed Vanessa then, her eyes going wide. Did you stay all night? Yes. Because my daddy needed you? Yes. Sophie thought about this seriously. Out. Then she walked over and wrapped her arms around Vanessa's waist, hugging her tight. Thank you for taking care of him, she said. He's really important. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears she couldn't stop. She knelt down to Sophie's level, hugging her back. You're both really important, she said, her voice breaking. And in that moment, Vanessa knew what she had to do. It didn't matter what Robert Hutchins wanted. It didn't matter what the board expected. It didn't matter what logic or business sense dictated. She couldn't authorize cuts that would destroy families like Ethan's. Couldn't go back to being the person who valued profit over people. Couldn't pretend that the last few months hadn't changed everything about who she was and what she wanted. Even if it cost her Crestline. Even if it cost her everything she'd built. Even if it meant starting over from nothing. Some things were worth the risk. The emergency board meeting was called for Thursday afternoon, which gave Vanessa exactly 48 hours to prepare for the end of her career. She spent Tuesday working through every possible scenario, running numbers until her eyes burned, looking for some magical solution that would save both the jobs and her position. There wasn't one. The math was brutally simple. Either she authorized the outsourcing and kept her job, or she refused and lost everything. By Wednesday morning, she'd accepted what had to happen. Ethan stayed home from work that day, doctor's orders, and Vanessa found herself at his house again instead of her office. Sophie was at school. The house was quiet. Ethan sat on the couch with ice on his head while Vanessa paced his living room, rehearsing arguments she knew wouldn't matter. "You're going to wear a hole in my floor," Ethan said. "I need to move. Sitting still makes me think too much." Thinking is usually considered a good thing, not when all your thoughts lead to the same place. Vanessa stopped pacing, turned to face him. "I'm going to refuse the outsourcing. You know that, right?" "I know." "Which means Robert will have exactly what he needs, proof that I'm compromised, that I'm making decisions based on emotion instead of logic." "Are you?" "Yes." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. "I'm making this decision because I can't live with myself if I destroy 300 families to save my own position. That's not logic. That's feeling. That's exactly what Robert said I'd do." "So he wins." "He wins." Ethan shifted the ice pack, studying her face. "You're okay with that?" "No, I'm terrified. I've spent 10 years building that company, 10 years proving I could do what my father did, and I'm about to throw it all away for—" She stopped, frustrated. "I don't even know what for." "For the right thing." The right thing doesn't pay mortgages. The right thing doesn't keep food on tables. If I just stayed the person I was before that storm, none of this would be happening. Whoops. "If you'd stayed that person," Ethan said quietly, "you'd still be miserable, still be alone, still be trying to convince yourself that power was enough to fill the hole inside you." Vanessa sat down hard on the other end of the couch. Maybe miserable and alone was safer. Safer isn't the same as better. No, but safer doesn't destroy everything you've built. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My wife left when Sophie was 2. I told you that. But I didn't tell you why." Vanessa looked at him. "She said I was too soft, too willing to settle for a simple life. She wanted someone with ambition, someone who wanted more than a small house and a steady job and quiet evenings at home." Ethan's voice was steady, but there was old pain underneath it. "For a while after she left, I tried to be that person. Worked longer hours, pushed for promotions, tried to prove I could be ambitious too." "What happened?" "Sophie stopped sleeping, started having nightmares. Asked me every morning if I was going to leave too." He looked down at his hands. "I realized I was sacrificing the life I actually wanted for some idea of what I thought I should want, and it was destroying the only thing that actually mattered." "What did you do?" I stopped, went back to being the person I was, accepted that I was never going to be some corporate success story. And you know what? Sophie started sleeping again. I started sleeping again. Life got smaller, but it got better." Vanessa absorbed this, seeing the parallel he was drawing. "You're saying I should stop trying to be something I'm not. I'm saying you get to choose who you are, not Robert Hutchins, not the board, not your father's ghost, you. And if I choose wrong, then you choose again. That's how life works." Vanessa wanted to believe him, wanted to believe it was that simple. But she'd spent so long being certain of who she was and what she wanted. Changing that felt like losing her foundation. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know. Not just of losing my job, of not knowing who I am without it." Ethan reached across the couch and took her hand. "You're Vanessa, the woman who makes terrible pancakes and falls asleep during kids' movies and argues with 6-year-olds about snow angel technique. That's who you are. Everything else is just what you do." "What if that's not enough? It's enough for Sophie. It's enough for me. He squeezed her hand. When's it going to be enough for you? Vanessa didn't have an answer to that. Thursday arrived too fast and too slow at the same time. Vanessa dressed with extra care that morning, armor for a battle she knew she'd lose. The boardroom was already full when she arrived, and the tension was immediate. Robert sat at his usual spot, looking satisfied. The other board members looked uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to their CEO and pressure from Robert's faction. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Vanessa started, standing because sitting would have felt like giving up before she'd even begun. I've completed the analysis of the Texas outsourcing proposal. She pulled up her presentation, spent 20 minutes walking through every detail. The financial savings, yes, but also the human cost. The ripple effects on local economy, the potential damage to company culture and employee loyalty, the long-term risks of prioritizing short-term profit. When she finished, the room was silent. Robert broke it. So your recommendation is? My recommendation is that we reject the outsourcing proposal. On what grounds? On the grounds that it's the wrong decision for the company, not just financially, but ethically, morally, strategically. Vanessa met his eyes. We're performing better than we have in years. Employee satisfaction is up. Retention is up. Productivity is up. Destroying that for a short-term cost savings would be short-sighted. Or, Robert said, refusing to make difficult decisions that prioritize profit is exactly the kind of emotional leadership I've been warning this board about. There's nothing emotional about looking at long-term sustainability. You're protecting your boyfriend's job. Let's not pretend this is about anything else. The accusation hung in the air. Vanessa could feel every eye on her, waiting to see how she'd respond. Ethan Cole's position is irrelevant to this decision, she said carefully. If the outsourcing made genuine business sense, I'd authorize it regardless of personal considerations. But it doesn't. The analysis shows what you want it to show. Robert stood up, commanding the room. I think it's time we acknowledged what everyone in this room already knows. Our CEO is compromised. Her judgment is clouded by a personal relationship. She's no longer capable of making the hard decisions this company needs. That's not true, isn't it? You've been leaving early, taking personal calls, spending company time on matters that have nothing to do with Crestline. And now, when faced with a decision that would definitively prove you can still lead objectively, you're choosing sentiment over sense. I'm choosing people over profit, Vanessa corrected, because, unlike you, I've learned that companies are made of people, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. And there it is. Robert looked around the table. That's the new Vanessa Hale, the one who thinks feelings matter more than fiduciary responsibility. The one who's forgotten that our job is to maximize shareholder value, not to make everyone comfortable. Our job, Vanessa said, her voice rising, is to build something sustainable, something people want to be part of, something that doesn't treat human beings as disposable resources. Very inspiring, very emotional, very wrong. Robert pulled out a folder. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in our current CEO. All in favor? Vanessa watched hands go up around the table. Not everyone, not even most. But enough. More than enough. 6 votes. One short of the majority they needed to remove her immediately, but more than enough to start official proceedings. I see, Vanessa said quietly. You have until end of quarter to demonstrate you can lead effectively, Robert said. That gives you 3 weeks to either authorize the outsourcing or provide an alternative that matches its financial impact. Fail to do either, and this board will have no choice but to replace you. 3 weeks. It might as well have been 3 days. There was no alternative that would satisfy Robert, and they both knew it. Understood, Vanessa said. She left the boardroom with her head high, but once she reached her office, the facade cracked. She closed the door, leaned against it, and finally let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. 10 years of sacrifice and ruthless decisions and proving herself over and over again. And it was ending not with glory or success, but with accusations that she'd become too human. The irony was almost funny. Her phone rang. Ethan. How'd it go? he asked. About as badly as expected. Maybe worse. What happens now? I have 3 weeks to either betray everything I've learned from you or get removed from my position. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm sorry. Don't be. This isn't your fault. Feels like it is. It's not. It's mine. I'm the one who let my guard down, who let myself care about people, who forgot that in business, caring is just another word for weakness. You don't believe that. What do you about that? Don't I? Vanessa moved to the window, looking out at the city below. Maybe Robert's right. Maybe I'm not fit to lead anymore. Maybe I've gone soft. Or maybe you finally figured out what actually matters. And what's that? People. Connection. Living a life that means something beyond quarterly earnings. Vanessa closed her eyes. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be a person who doesn't define herself by her job. Then come over tonight. Let me show you. Ethan, please just come over. Sophie's been asking about you anyway. Something about a school project she wants your help with. Despite everything, Vanessa found herself smiling. What kind of project? I have no idea. She's been very secretive about it, but she specifically said she needed you. That decided it. Vanessa left the office at 5 o'clock for the first time in her career, drove across the city to the small house that had somehow become more home than her luxury penthouse ever was. Sophie answered the door, bouncing with excitement. You came! I wasn't sure you'd come. Your dad said you needed help with a project. Come see! Come see! Sophie dragged Vanessa to her room where papers were spread across the floor in organized chaos. Drawings, mostly. Stick figures and houses and bright crayon colors. It's for career day, Sophie explained. We have to draw pictures of what we want to be when we grow up and why. And I need help because mine is complicated. Vanessa sat down on the floor, careful of her suit. What do you want to be? I want to be like you. The words hit harder than they should have. Like me? Yeah, because you were sad, and then you learned how to be happy. And I think that's really important. Sophie pulled out one of her drawings. See? This is you at the beginning, all gray and cold. The drawing showed a figure in dark colors standing alone in front of a tall building. And this is you now. Sophie held up another picture. This one showed the same figure, but in bright colors, standing with 2 smaller figures in front of a house. You have friends now, and you smile more, and you're not scary anymore. I was scary? At first, but not now. Sophie looked up at her with complete sincerity. I want to be someone who can change like that, who can learn to be better. Vanessa felt tears threatening. That's a very good thing to want to be. Really? Really? But you know what? You're already that person. You already know how to be kind and brave and to see the good in people. Vanessa touched the drawing gently. I'm the one who had to learn from you. Sophie thought about this seriously. Then she hugged Vanessa tight. I'm glad you learned. You're much better now. So I've been told, and they worked on the project together for the next hour, Vanessa helping Sophie organize her drawings and add details and figure out what she wanted to say. Ethan appeared in the doorway at some point, watching them with an expression Vanessa couldn't quite read. Later, after Sophie was in bed, Vanessa and Ethan sat on the porch in the cool spring evening. The neighborhood was quiet, just the sound of crickets and distant traffic. She sees you differently than you see yourself, Ethan said. She sees a fantasy, some version of me that doesn't really exist. Or she sees who you actually are, who you've been becoming. I don't know who I'm becoming. That's the problem. Vanessa leaned back in the worn porch chair. At the board meeting today, Robert called me emotional, said I'd gone soft, said I couldn't make hard decisions anymore. Do you think he's right? But it is old. Part of me does. The old me would have authorized those cuts without hesitation, would have seen it as necessary, would have slept fine that night. And now? Now I can't stop thinking about the 300 people who would lose their jobs, about their families, about what that would do to them. She looked at Ethan. That's what you've done to me. Made me care when caring just makes everything harder. Is it harder, or is it just real? What's the difference? When something's hard but fake, you can walk away from it. When something's hard but real, you have to deal with it, have to feel it, have to live with the consequences of your choices. Ethan reached over and took her hand. That's what makes it matter. I'm going to lose Crestlines, Vanessa said. You know that, right? There's no scenario where I keep my job. I know, and I should be devastated, should be fighting harder, should be finding some way to win. She squeezed his hand, but all I can think about is Sophie's drawing, about how she sees me as someone who learned to be happy, and I realize I'd rather be that person than CEO. So, what are you going to do? Vanessa took a breath. I'm going to resign, before Robert can remove me, before this turns into an ugly corporate battle. I'm going to walk away on my own terms. When? Monday. I'll draft a statement this weekend, something that makes it clear I'm choosing this, that I'm not being forced out, that I've realized there are more important things than profit margins. And then? Then I figure out who I am when I'm not Vanessa Hale, CEO. She managed a weak smile. Terrifying, right? Terrifying, but also brave. I don't feel brave. Ooh, you never do when you're actually being brave. That's how you know it counts. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A car drove past, headlights cutting through the dark. Normal life happening around them, indifferent to corporate drama and career endings. Can I stay tonight? Vanessa asked suddenly. Ethan looked at her. You don't have to ask. I just don't want to go back to my apartment. Don't want to be alone right now. Then don't be alone. Vanessa spent that night on Ethan's couch again, but this time she actually slept. Deep, dreamless sleep that left her feeling more rested than she had in years. When she woke Saturday morning, Sophie was standing beside the couch, staring at her. You slept over again, Sophie observed. I did. Does that mean you're going to be here more? Would you like that? Mrs. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. Daddy's happier when you're here, and so am I, so sit. Vanessa pulled the little girl into a hug, something she never would have done 6 months ago. Then I'll try to be here more. The weekend passed in a blur of normal things. Grocery shopping, making dinner, watching movies, playing games, all the mundane activities that made up a life. And somewhere in the middle of it, Vanessa realized she was happy. Not excited, not accomplished, not powerful, just happy. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Monday morning came with bright sunshine and a clarity Vanessa hadn't expected. She dressed carefully, not in armor this time, but in something softer, more herself. Then she drove to Cresline Tower for what she knew would be the last time as CEO. Her letter of resignation was short, professional but honest. After 10 years of leading Crestline Holdings, she'd realized that the company needed someone whose vision aligned more clearly with traditional growth models. She was proud of what they'd accomplished together, but it was time for her to step aside and explore new directions. She didn't mention Robert, didn't mention the outsourcing debate, didn't air any corporate dirty laundry, just a clean exit that left the door open for whatever came next. The hardest part was telling her staff. Vanessa called an all-hands meeting for Monday afternoon. The conference room was packed, people standing along the walls, everyone sensing something big was coming. Thank you all for being here, Vanessa started, her voice steady. I'm not going to draw this out. Effective immediately, I'm resigning as CEO of Crestline Holdings. The room erupted in shock and questions. Vanessa held up a hand. I know this seems sudden, but I've realized over the past few months that I need to make some changes in my life. I've spent 10 years devoted entirely to this company, and while I'm proud of what we've built, I've also lost sight of other things that matter. She looked around the room, seeing faces she'd worked with for years, people she'd been hard on, people she'd pushed, people she'd never really seen as human until recently. I want to thank you all for your patience with me, for putting up with my demanding standards and my inability to see past quarterly numbers. You've taught me more than you know about what actually makes a company worth building. Marcus Chen raised his hand. What happens to the outsourcing proposal? Wokes. That's up to the new CEO and the board, but I've made my position clear. I think it's the wrong move. Vanessa paused. I hope whoever replaces me has the courage to prioritize people over profit, but that's not my decision anymore. Ethan was standing near the back and their eyes met across the crowded room. He nodded once, small and encouraging. After the meeting, people came up to her one by one. Some thanked her. Some seemed angry. Some just looked confused. Gerald Moss, the operations VP who'd challenged her all those months ago, shook her hand. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm sorry to see you go." "Why's that?" "Because you are finally becoming the kind of leader people wanted to follow. Not just fear. Too little, too late, I guess." Maybe. Or maybe it's just the right time for the next chapter. Vanessa spent the rest of the day packing up her office. 10 years of work reduced to a few boxes. Awards and photos, and all the physical evidence of success. None of it felt as important as it once had. She was almost finished when Robert appeared in her doorway. "Running away?" he said. "Leaving on my terms." "Same thing." "No, it's not." Vanessa faced him directly. "You wanted me gone because you thought I'd gone soft. Thought I couldn't make hard decisions anymore. You were right about one thing. I did change. But that's not weakness. That's growth. Growth that cost you your position. Growth that gave me something more important. Perspective, connection. A life that doesn't revolve around destroying people to prove I'm strong enough to lead." "I'm so same. Sa mate." Robert's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. Throwing away everything your father built for what? A man and his kid? Some fantasy about being happy. It's not a fantasy. It's just different than what you value." Vanessa picked up her last box. "I hope you get what you want, Robert. I hope the next CEO cuts all the jobs you think need cutting. I hope Crestline becomes the ruthlessly efficient machine you always wanted it to be. And I hope you realize before it's too late that none of it actually matters." She walked out before he could respond, leaving the corner office and everything it represented behind. The elevator ride down felt longer than it ever had. 42 floors of descent, each one taking her further from the person she'd been and closer to whoever she was becoming. When she reached the ground floor, Ethan was waiting in the lobby. "You didn't have to come down here," Vanessa said. "I know, but I wanted to be here when you walked out. Wanted to make sure you knew you weren't doing this alone." Something in Vanessa's chest cracked open completely. She set down her box and just let herself lean into him. Let herself be held in the middle of the marble lobby where anyone could see. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said into his shoulder. "Nobody does. That's the secret everybody's keeping. I just threw away my entire career. You threw away a job. That's not the same thing. What if I regret it?" "Then you'll deal with it. Same way you deal with everything else." Ethan pulled back enough to look at her face. "But I don't think you will. I think you're going to figure out who you are when you're not hiding behind that title. And I think that person is going to be amazing." You have a lot of faith in someone who doesn't have faith in herself. That's what people do when they care about each other. They have faith when you can't. Vanessa kissed him then, right there in the lobby, not caring who saw or what it meant or what came next, just needing to feel connected to something real in the middle of all this uncertainty. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. "Take me home?" she asked. "Your place or mine?" "Yours, always yours." The months that followed were nothing like Vanessa had planned and everything she needed. She spent the first few weeks in a strange limbo, waking up each morning with nowhere to go, no meetings to attend, no emails that couldn't wait. It was disorienting and uncomfortable and occasionally terrifying, but it was also freeing. She started small, helping Sophie with homework, cooking dinner with Ethan and only burning things occasionally, getting to know her neighbors, remembering what it felt like to have time to think instead of just react. The media covered her resignation, of course. Business journals speculated about why she'd left. Some blamed Robert Hutchins. Some suggested health problems. Some hinted at scandal. Vanessa ignored all of it. She'd learned that other people's narratives didn't have to become her truth. Money was tight at first. She'd saved enough to be comfortable for a while, but her lifestyle required significant adjustments. The penthouse apartment went first, replaced by something smaller and more practical. The designer clothes, the expensive meals, the luxury she'd surrounded herself with because she could. None of it mattered as much as she'd thought it would. What mattered was Saturday mornings with Sophie. Was learning to actually cook instead of just ordering takeout. Was long conversations with Ethan about nothing and everything. Was slowly building a life that felt real instead of performative. It wasn't perfect. She still had bad days where she questioned every decision. Still had moments of panic when she checked her bank account and saw numbers that used to seem insignificant suddenly mattering. Still had to resist the urge to refresh business news sites, watching Crestline continue without her. But the good days outnumbered the bad. And that was something. 6 months after her resignation, Vanessa got a call from an unexpected source. A small nonprofit that worked with displaced workers, helping them find new positions after layoffs and corporate restructuring. They were looking for a consultant, someone who understood corporate culture from the inside, but also understood the human cost of business decisions. "I'm not sure I'm qualified," Vanessa told the director. "You spent 10 years running a major company, then you walked away because you refused to make cuts you didn't believe in. That makes you more qualified than anyone else I can think of." "I failed." "No. You succeeded at the wrong thing, realized it, and changed course. That's not failure, that's wisdom." Vanessa took the position. Part-time, flexible hours, nothing like the all-consuming role she'd left behind. But it was meaningful. She could help people navigate corporate transitions, could advocate for better severance packages and retraining programs, could use everything she'd learned about business to actually help instead of just profit. It wasn't glory, wasn't power, wasn't the kind of success that got written up in Forbes. But it was enough. The winter festival at Sophie's school came around again, nearly a year after Vanessa had first walked into that small house during the blizzard. This time, she wasn't a stranger showing up unexpectedly. She was a regular part of Sophie's life. Someone the teachers knew, someone the other parents had gotten used to seeing. Sophie was performing in a play about seasons, dressed as spring with flowers in her hair. She kept looking into the audience, searching for her people. When she spotted Ethan and Vanessa sitting together in the third row, her whole face lit up. After the performance, Sophie ran off stage and straight into Vanessa's arms. "Did you see me? Did you see my part?" "You were perfect," Vanessa said, and meant it. Daddy cried a little bit. "I did not," Ethan protested. "You did. I saw you." "Okay, maybe a little, but you were very good." They walked out of the school together, Sophie between them, holding both their hands. It was cold, but not brutal. Winter getting ready to let go and make room for spring. "I'm hungry," Sophie announced. "Can we get pizza?" "Always with the pizza," Ethan said. "Pizza is important, Daddy." "Pizza is important," Vanessa agreed and caught Ethan's eye over Sophie's head. They'd never officially defined what they were. Never had the awkward conversation about labels or expectations or where this was heading. It had just evolved naturally, the way real things do. Vanessa spent most nights at Ethan's house now. Had a drawer in his dresser. Had her name on Sophie's emergency contact list at school. It was a life. Not the one she'd planned. Not the one she'd thought she wanted. But it was hers. And it was real. And it was full of the kind of meaning that quarterly reports and board meetings had never provided. At the pizza place, Sophie was animated, talking nonstop about the play and her friends, and the boy who'd pulled her hair had apologized and now they were friends. "See?" Sophie said to Vanessa. "He learned, just like you said. Someone showed him how to be kind." "Who showed him?" "His mom, and his teacher, and me, a little bit." Sophie took a huge bite of pizza. "Everyone needs help sometimes, even grown-ups." "Very wise," Vanessa said. "I learned it from you." I think I learned it from you." "Then we learned it from each other. That's how it works." Later, after Sophie was asleep, Vanessa and Ethan sat on the porch again. It had become their spot, the place where real conversations happened. "I got a job offer today," Vanessa said. Ethan tensed slightly. "From where?" "Corporate consulting firm, 6-figure salary, corner office, the whole thing. Are you going to take it?" "No." Vanessa didn't hesitate. "That's not what I want anymore." "What do you want?" This life, this porch, this man, this little girl who thinks I hung the moon even though I'm just figuring things out as I go." She looked at Ethan. "I want the life I've built here, not the one I left behind." "You're sure?" I'm sure. For the first time in maybe ever, I'm actually sure about something. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Move in with us, officially. Not just your stuff in a drawer and spending most nights here. Actually move in." Vanessa's heart did something complicated. "You want that?" Sophie wants it. I want it. The only question is whether you want it. I'm messy. I'm still learning how to be a normal person. I'll probably burn dinner more often than not. I know all of that. And I don't know how to be in a relationship. Don't know how to do this domestic life thing. Don't know if I'll be any good at it. Nobody knows if they'll be good at it until they try. Ethan reached for her hand. But I know you're trying. I know you care. I know you show up. That's enough. Is it really? For me? For Sophie? Yeah, it's more than enough. Vanessa felt tears on her face and didn't bother wiping them away. Okay. Okay. I'll move in. I'll try this. I'll keep learning how to be someone who builds snow angels and makes terrible pancakes and doesn't need a corner office to know she matters. Ethan kissed her, soft and certain. That's all I'm asking. Moving in was messy and chaotic, and nothing like the organized corporate transitions Vanessa was used to. But it was real. Sophie helped her unpack boxes, asking questions about everything. Ethan rearranged closets and drawers, making space for someone new in a life that had been just the two of them for so long. It wasn't smooth. There were adjustments and awkward moments and learning how to share space with people who had their own routines and expectations. But it worked. Slowly, imperfectly, it worked. Spring arrived properly, turning everything green and bright. Vanessa planted a garden in the small backyard because she'd never had time for one before, and now she did. Most of the plants died, but a few survived, and she learned from the ones that didn't. That became her philosophy. Try things. Fail at most of them. Learn from the failures. Try again. She started volunteering at Sophie's school, started taking cooking classes that only occasionally ended in disaster, started writing articles about corporate ethics and worker rights, using her voice to advocate for the kind of changes she hadn't been able to make from inside the system. It wasn't the life she'd imagined at 30 years old, standing in that corner office convinced that power was the only thing worth having. But it was better. One Saturday morning, almost a year and a half after the blizzard that had changed everything, Vanessa woke up to Sophie jumping on the bed. Wake up! It's Saturday!" "I'm aware," Vanessa mumbled, trying to pull the covers over her head. Sophie yanked them back. "We have to make pancakes. It's tradition." "Since when?" "Since always. Come on." Ethan was already in the kitchen, coffee brewing, sunlight streaming through the windows. He looked up when Vanessa stumbled in, Sophie dragging her by the hand. "She says we have a pancake tradition," Vanessa said. "We do. You're just late to it." They made pancakes together, Sophie directing operations like a tiny general, Ethan handling the actual cooking, Vanessa doing her best not to mess anything up too badly. The kitchen got messy. The pancakes were uneven, some burned, some came out raw in the middle. It was perfect. After breakfast, Sophie dragged them outside because spring was too nice to waste indoors. The garden Vanessa had planted was actually producing a few vegetables now, tomatoes and peppers, and some herbs that had somehow survived her inexperienced care. "Look," Sophie pointed at a small tomato plant. "You grew something." "I did." "See? You're good at this." "At gardening?" "At everything. At being here. At being you. Ba'am." Vanessa crouched down to Sophie's level. "You know what? I think you're right. I think I'm finally getting good at being me. Better than being a CEO? So much better than being a CEO." Later, while Sophie played in the yard, Ethan and Vanessa sat on the porch steps, watching her run around chasing butterflies. "You look happy," Ethan said. "I am happy." "That wasn't true when I met you." "Me?" "No. When you met me, I thought happiness was for weak people, that success meant sacrifice, that caring about others was just a distraction from building something important." Vanessa leaned her head on his shoulder. "I was so wrong about everything." "Not everything. You were right about being capable, about being strong. You just learned that strength looks different than you thought. I learned that from you. We learned it together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Sophie play, watching the neighborhood go about its Saturday business, watching life happen around them in all its messy, beautiful, imperfect glory. And Vanessa realized something profound. For 10 years, she'd been so afraid of being vulnerable that she'd built walls to keep everyone out. She'd convinced herself that being untouchable meant being safe, that power meant security, that success measured in dollars and titles was the only kind that mattered. But what she'd learned in this small house with these ordinary people was that connection required vulnerability, that real strength came from letting people see you struggle and choosing to keep trying anyway, that the measure of a life well lived wasn't what you accumulated, but what you gave and who you loved, and whether you had the courage to change when you realized you'd been wrong. She'd lost a company, lost a title, lost the version of success she'd spent a decade chasing. But she'd found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found herself, the real version, not the armor-plated CEO who never let anyone close, but the woman underneath, flawed and uncertain and still learning, still growing, still becoming. She'd found a family, not the one she was born into, but the one she'd chosen. A man who'd shown her that patience was stronger than power. A little girl who'd taught her that change was possible. A life that felt real instead of performed. And she'd found something that had been missing all those years she'd spent climbing corporate ladders and winning battles. Purpose that actually mattered. Work that helped people instead of just profiting from them. Days that felt meaningful even when they weren't productive. Mornings that started with pancakes and laughter instead of emails and anxiety. It wasn't the life anyone would feature in a business magazine. Wasn't the kind of success story that got told at conferences. Wasn't impressive by the metrics she'd once valued. But it was enough. More than enough? It was everything. Sophie came running over, breathless and grass-stained and beaming. "Daddy, Vanessa, I found a caterpillar. Come see." They followed her into the yard, Sophie explaining in great detail about the caterpillar's future as a butterfly, about transformation and change and becoming something different. And Vanessa thought about her own transformation, about the cold, ruthless woman she'd been, about the long winter that had forced her to see what really mattered, about the slow thaw that had taught her how to be human. She'd been so afraid that changing would mean losing herself. Instead, she'd finally found the version of herself worth being. Sometimes the best thing that could happen to a person was losing everything they thought they needed, because only then could they discover what they actually wanted. Only then could they build something real instead of something that just looked impressive from the outside. Vanessa had lost her empire, but she'd gained a life. And that trade, terrifying as it had been to make, was the best decision she'd ever made. Because at the end of the day, success wasn't about how much you accumulated or how high you climbed or how many people feared your name. Success was waking up next to someone who saw all your flaws and loved you anyway. Was watching a child who wasn't yours by blood claim you as family. Was planting tomatoes and burning pancakes and learning that perfection was overrated anyway. Success was being human, fully, messily, beautifully human. And finally, after 31 years of running from it, Vanessa had learned how to be exactly that.